We're here today to talk about the deeper nuances of breastfeeding. We're going to talk about the emotional, psychological, relational, and physical embodiment pieces of breastfeeding that sometimes get missed or brushed over because these are very nuanced topics. So I'm here today with Kayla, who is our resident IBCLC on the Birthing Soul app. She's created all of the breastfeeding education and various videos and support. So, Kayla, welcome.
Hi, thanks. It's great to be here.
Will you just introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, so my name's Kayla. I'm a registered dietitian and an IBCLC, and I am also a mother of three. I've breastfed all of my kids, with each of my breastfeeding journeys looking very different from the next. I am so excited to be a part of the Birthing Soul and just help support mothers in very new ways.
Great. And when you say IBCLC, for those who don't know, what is an IBCLC?
Yeah, so an IBCLC stands for International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. It is the highest level of training and gold standard of care for lactation support for new and expecting mothers.
Amazing. It's so important to have IBCLCs because I feel you do just get so much hands-on wisdom collected in that process of becoming an IBCLC that you capture all the varied nuances of breastfeeding because as we know, breastfeeding is such a varied journey. I breastfed both of my children as well. And I think it's important to just shed some light on some of the more emotional, relational, and alternative layers of breastfeeding that maybe get missed in our general conversations, which can be very polarized, by the way. So, would you share your philosophy and approach to breastfeeding?
Yeah, sure. So I see breastfeeding as both, a biological design. Our bodies are naturally built to make milk, but it's also a relational experience. So my approach is to really honor that physiology of milk production and infant feeding while also supporting those deep emotional and mental layers of a mother's journey. Breastfeeding isn't all or nothing. It's really about embodiment, connection with our body and connection with baby. Of course, nourishment for baby and also empowerment. Um, so I would say my philosophy is really to meet mothers where they are, blending that lactation science and functional nutrition piece, and also compassionate guidance so that they feel capable and supported, whatever their feeding journey might look like.
Mm. I love this because I feel like in breastfeeding conversations, it can be so polarized. Like it's either you are or you aren't, and very black and white. But hearing you say that it isn't all or nothing and mixed feeding options are available, I think is just so exciting. And also, just that breastfeeding is not just about the food, that there's a strong relational component. I just think I'm really curious to hear more. So, I'm curious, like, what do you feel is the heart and soul of breastfeeding for mother and for baby?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, like it's not all or nothing. It's really not just about the feeding. It's much more than that. There's this exchange of hormones, of warmth, of presence. We're building a bond that, carries into our child's attachment and their sense of security, their emotional resilience for years to come. Um,
Mm.
one example of this would be oxytocin, that love hormone, and that's flowing through mother and baby when we are breastfeeding. It's calming our nervous system and fostering trust. And for many women, I feel those quiet moments at the breast become a really grounding rhythm for them, amidst the chaos of new motherhood. It's an invitation to kind of step away and calm the chaos around them. Um, And this really impacts, us on that soul level because we're reminded that we're not just caring for baby, we're building this big picture, like I said, like for years to come.
Mm, I love that. Just like really putting mother and baby into a rhythm together. And I feel
Hmm.
that's such a interesting way to look at it because before having a baby, that's not your life rhythm, and all of a sudden you become very much tethered to the hunger cues and the needs and nourishment of a baby. And that there's actually a physiological and relationship benefit to being in rhythm, being in sync like that. It's so beautiful. I mean, the design is really incredible. Um,
Yeah.
and how do you guide women toward this deeper connection with their baby, with their body in preparation for breastfeeding?
Yeah. And, I love that I just want to highlight that preparation for breastfeeding because I feel like education and preparation, even before birth, even thinking about how, you envision feeding your baby, whether that's exclusively breastfeeding or partial breastfeeding, or maybe not at all, or maybe there's ways that you want to adapt some of these benefits of breastfeeding into your own feeding journey. Um, there's a lot of ways that this can look. And I think with preparing mothers for this journey and this connection, we have to start thinking about those conversations in advance. I feel a lot of mothers don't understand the normalcy of challenges, even though again, by biological design, our body will naturally make milk, whether we want to breastfeed or not.
Mm,
Um, Sometimes we can expect breastfeeding to be this instinctual and seamless experience when in reality it isn't. And as a result, that brings up these feelings of guilt or failure,
mm,
which is, a significant hurdle that I see a lot of mothers face in those early weeks. Um, So when I'm guiding a mother to really take on, this next chapter of their life with confidence in themselves and in their ability to feed their baby, we really want them to connect, kind of quiet the noise. I feel as an IBCLC, I am a member of that care team that can kind of help cut through some of the misguided advice that mothers receive from even the most well-intentioned family members or friends. But that circle of support is going to still remain, important. Um, but on that deeper level of connection, I see the breasts as kind of this extension of our whole being. It's sacred, it's powerful, it's wise. This journey deserves to be protected. And embodiment is really that opportunity, that invitation to like slow down, noticing sensations. When we start to experience challenges, it's easy to get into like the data, like,
mm,
oh, I want to track all the dirty diapers, all the wet diapers, the numbers of feedings, the timing of feedings,
mm.
how much my baby is taking at the breast. And while sometimes that information can be really helpful in guiding our, the way that we're going to troubleshoot challenges, we don't want to obsess about that
Mm.
because obsessing about the data is kind of this outward, um, it takes our attention outside and not on what's really happening with each feeding, when baby's coming to the breast and we're noticing the warmth of their cheek against us and the rhythm of our breath and baby's breath regulating, co-regulating with each other. Um, our letdown and noticing just, again, more of just nourishment. We're also noticing just that security and attachment that's also happening.
Yeah, I love that. It's so powerful to kind of just say that there is a space sometimes to just set the data and the logic aside and step into the body more. And I feel what you're talking about just brings up for me how breasts are this highly charged topic in our society and maybe just emotionally in our family or in our own feminine lineage, where like how are we supposed to just step from breasts being highly sexualized and obsessed over in one scenario and shift into it being this source of comfort and nurturance for the baby? Like, what do you feel about that?
Yeah, this brings up a lot of thoughts for me because, especially as a mom of three and becoming more comfortable with like feeding in public,
Mm,
I have to remind myself sometimes that not everybody sees the breast as this nourishment and just a nurturing environment for baby.
mhm.
They're still kind of in that mindset that breasts are sexualized and should be covered up or should be hidden. And I do believe that there is this transformation that happens in women when we become mothers, that we start to notice and respect our body for really its innate wisdom and natural design. Um, some could argue, like, yes, the breasts are designed to be this like sexual organ, and some can say, no, it was actually designed to be like a nurturing like part of our body. And so I don't know if there's really any way around that. That might just be a never-ending battle that we have to deal with in our society. But as mothers and being embodied and noticing our, seeing our body as a source of nourishment and stepping into that powerful position as a mother, I think we become less, maybe not for everybody, but I do see a lot of mothers over time just be like, oh, I don't care, like what they think. I don't care what they say. Like, I'm going to feed my baby because that's what matters
Yeah.
most. I'm going to take care of my breasts because it's my body. Um, and we start to quiet the noise outside of this little bubble of peace that we are creating for ourselves between
Yeah.
us and our babies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I feel that so much the focus at the Birthing Soul is to kind of take some of these topics about like how do we reconcile breasts being both sexual and pleasure oriented and also this source of home and comfort and nurturance for our babies, and how do we practice holding both things? And
Mhm.
it's kind of just bringing up for me how breasts have these stories, this deeper story, and somatically, energetically, we look at the breast as really extension of the heart.
Yeah.
And there's so many stories in our hearts, I think, about not only our own breasts and bodies, but the stories we carry from maybe were we breastfed as a child, were our mothers or grandmothers breastfed, and what might be tethered to that. I know different cultural groups have different associations with that too, given their ancestral history, maybe of exploitation or
Mhm.
being separated and removed from their babies, all types of things, or just stories and beliefs from recent modern history around should women breastfeed? Is it considered dignified? Is it what our family expects to do? And I think that creates a huge emotional whirlpool, honestly, around like, can I reconcile maybe some subconscious emotional material around my breasts and what my family believes and what my culture believes versus what my body and baby is telling me in this new emerging relationship. So there's a lot there, I
Mhm.
think. Um,
Yes. Yeah, there's so much pressure from just conflicting advice and those cultural expectations, even just family expectations, like you had named. Just, I also feel that, sometimes I'll see mothers who were not breastfed themselves, and that can influence their breastfeeding journey in a few different ways. On one side, they may lack that support from
mm,
family, like they won't be able to have family as a support, or, the minute that they come across a hurdle, there's a family member speaking, whispering in their ear, like, oh, you should just give up. This is too hard. It's okay to do formula. And yes, it is okay to do formula. Ultimately, we want our baby to be fed. But if the mother is really set on trying to make breastfeeding work, we want to support her in those goals. And so with those, she's probably already feeling this level of guilt and failure and shame. And family can be such a powerful influence for how that journey goes. But there might also be some grieving, when they're feeding their own baby and wishing that they had had that experience themselves.
Mm.
Um, there's so many different mother wounds that can come up, I feel, and breastfeeding is just one example of when those can surface. There's a lot of other examples in parenthood where these will come, but sometimes breastfeeding is the first one.
Absolutely. And I feel like what you're naming is so profound, just how dynamic of an experience it is for a woman to step into postpartum, obviously already on a physical healing journey from giving birth, navigating the breastfeeding journey, and simultaneously reconciling the emotional disturbances that might be arising through that experience. It's just so much to
Hmm.
hold, and just really want to honor mothers who are going through that, because it is so dynamic. And we really, through the Birthing Soul app, try to offer these prompted reflections both prenatally before giving birth and in the postpartum to kind of maybe try to address some of this emotional depth when you're not right in the center of intensity. Maybe
Hmm.
process a little bit beforehand, reflect and open up these conversations, maybe grieve a little bit as you're naming, or um, make meaning out of some of the shame or guilt that mothers tend to carry from their lineage and family. So that when you're stepping into this kind of intense moment of like, is baby being fed? Like, can be kind of a lot in those early weeks. Some of that stuff has already been looked at a little bit. Um, but I'm really curious if you would share a little bit about what you have taught in the Birthing Soul app around also just connecting women to their bodies as they prepare for the breastfeeding journey.
Yeah. So in the app, we have different like visual demonstrations, like lymphatic self massage and hand expression. And again, that's that opportunity to bring moms back to their bodies and maybe familiarize themselves with their breasts in a very different way than they ever have before. Um, these practices are really gentle and allow you to really witness the power of your body. I always tell my moms that I'm working with that hand expression itself can be such an empowering practice. And it does take practice to really get there, but it can be so empowering when you get it because you're like, wow, I don't need to rely on these outside tools. I have the ability to make and remove milk by my own hands. Um, and it really allows even just that practice of getting in touch with your own body, really allows us to kind of shift the narrative from performance, like, am I doing this right? Am I making enough milk? Um, which can happen definitely when we get into pumping, when moms are constantly watching the bottles and being like, is the milk coming? I mean, I've done it myself.
Mhm.
To more presence, like, I'm here with my body is enough, my baby is held, my baby is supported, whatever that might look like, but just bringing it back to presence. And again, that opportunity to just ground yourself in a new rhythm.
I love that. Really shifting from this comparison and tracking again back to presence when possible. And it's true, I see more and more, honestly, even with influencers and things like that, showing their giant freezer stashes of milk and showing themselves producing all this additional milk. And I think for women who are just feeding at the breast, it's kind of invisible, the milk transference, right? The baby's mouth is covering and you don't really see and maybe get that external validation source as much.
Hmm.
And some women really need to pump, obviously, and that's completely valid. But for those women who are just exclusively breastfeeding babies on the nipple, you may never really see even what it looks like. I mean, I remember one of my dearest friends who was the first to have babies. She had twins, and she's telling me, like days postpartum, she's like, Britta, I had no idea that milk shoots out from 10 different holes in my nipple. She's like, I thought this was like a straw situation where the baby just sucks and there's just, like a straw. And I feel what you've offered through the hand expression tutorials and things are just so beautiful to kind of get a deeper sense and an embodied experience of breastfeeding and cultivate a different relationship with your breasts. And as you prepare for that journey and as you go along, it's just so special. So I'm so excited for people to receive your wisdom.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is information, that we're not receiving as young, maturing women going through sex ed, experiencing our periods for the first time. Like, this is new information that happens in that transition, like what happens with breast changes in pregnancy. Like, our body is not going to be making milk before then.
Yeah.
And it really allows us to witness like the strength, I think, of our own body. Like, our bodies are amazing, incredible. And hopefully by the time you actually start breastfeeding, you have already been able to witness that through childbirth. Um, and I don't know, I'm just always in awe of how incredible the female body is.
Yeah. So beautiful. I love
Mhm.
this. Wow, we've talked about mother wounds, the emotional ties. I'm kind of curious if you would talk a little bit about some of the things that you see, maybe challenges that women are encountering, or um, ways that we can address a more nuanced perspective of breastfeeding. Because again, we were talking about sometimes it's so black and white. So, if a mom is having low supply or isn't sure her baby's getting enough milk, like, is breastfeeding just about that? Should she continue putting baby on the breast? What are your thoughts and feelings around that?
Yeah. So, obviously there's a lot of different challenges that can come arise when we're talking about milk production specifically. I feel like that's such a sensitive topic for so many women, and it's really tied into their sense of self-worth.
Mm.
Um, Unfortunately, like, the amount of milk, can I exclusively breastfeed or do I have to give any formula? In my line of work, I've seen many moms that, if they can't exclusively breastfeed, they'd rather just not at all, which is, valid, but also really heartbreaking too, because I don't feel like we're doing enough service to help moms understand how incredible breast milk is, how much of a miracle it is, and how even just tiny little drops can be powerful. Um, and there's, again, that emotional, relational piece of breastfeeding or even bottle feeding your baby, that close connection, sense of security. But with, low milk supply, let's say we have a mom who is contemplating weaning, which is such a difficult journey that only really she can make. Weaning is so unique. The timelines are, there's no one timeline, one right timeline. The right timeline is the one that's right for the mom. And there is still benefit to baby suckling at the breast, even if they're only getting a little bit. I think with how much we have on our plates as moms, sometimes it can be hard in theory to think about, well, with all of the feedings and cleaning all the bottles and cleaning my pump parts and the time to pump and then all these doctor's appointments, it may not feel worth it to keep baby suckling at the breast. But some moms really are grieving the potential loss of that experience. Like, if I can't feed my baby enough to satisfy them, they're still starving after I'm nursing them, but they don't want to let that go. And, I've worked with moms before and I've come up with plans for them where they can still have that time together. I think of one mother that I worked with who, she was really grieving that process. And what we decided on was that after her long workday, she would come home and she would allow her baby to suckle at the breast so that they would have that bonding time. And then she would give baby to dad to bottle feed so that that baby is fed. But she had that bonding and connection time. And chances are baby got some milk because at that point, our breasts are not empty. It actually takes a really long time for our milk supply to completely dry up. Even if our breasts don't feel full or they feel really saggy, or really loose and soft, there still may be some milk in there. So again, thinking back to like even just tiny little drops are going to provide antibodies and stem cells and a little bit of nourishment and hydration. So there's lots of those, nourishing pieces to breast milk as well.
Mm.
And it makes me think about how, again, breastfeeding doesn't have to be all or nothing. It doesn't have to be black or white. There isn't this one perfect way that all mothers should make their breastfeeding journeys look. It's really unique to each individual. And again, my role as the professional is to really meet moms where they're at and help them get to where they want to be, even if that has to change throughout their feeding journey.
Yeah. I mean, I really love this idea that continuing putting baby on the breast and on the nipple, even if supply has dropped, even if it's not this black and white exclusive breastfeeding scenario, still benefits the mom and her well-being and her ability to bond and comfort and feel like she's offering this presence. But I feel it obviously nurtures the baby as well, right? The babies just want to suckle and they
Hmm.
want that closeness and connection. And it really lays that blueprint of emotional connection for the baby for their lifetime by doing such a simple thing, you know? But I
Right.
just think, I wonder if moms really recognize that that's possible for them, you know,
Hmm.
to continue to put baby on the breast and enjoy that
Yeah.
experience. Now, obviously, not all of breastfeeding is enjoyable, but sometimes it
Yeah.
is profoundly enjoyable and so beautiful. And especially for baby. I mean, breastfeeding is really all of our birthright.
Yeah. I would agree. Yeah. And with, with thinking about not knowing that it's even possible, we're so influenced by what we see out in society, by what we're seeing on media. And I think because there can be so much shame and guilt and sense of failure that comes when breastfeeding doesn't look picture perfect, not a lot of people are talking about the ways that they are making it work for them because of fear of judgment. Like, oh, you're giving your baby formula, or oh, you're bottle feeding and pumping, or, why don't you work with this lactation consultant? Why don't you, XYZ? There's just a lot of messages as if we're assuming that the mom hasn't bent over backwards to try to make things work. And that's where I think it's so important to just hold space for each other from a place of non-judgment and just knowing that we're all out there trying to do our best.
Yeah, I love that. I feel that non-judgmental approach and a nuanced approach to breastfeeding is so important that we can promote it and encourage women and prepare them to breastfeed. And we can also support the different layers of how that plays out. And we can also support mothers who aren't able to breastfeed or who choose not to for completely valid reasons. I think one of my primary values is that we really don't need to isolate any mother. and
Yes.
that we can agree that there are 100 reasons that are good reasons for anything that a mother chooses. And we can trust her. And I think that's kind of is that spirit of non-judgment.
Hmm.
I'm curious too, because you brought up weaning, and I feel like weaning is this really difficult conversation to have sometimes because usually women are weaning when they're not under the care of an OB or a midwife anymore. This could be weeks, months, or years down the road, and it's such a varied timeline. What do you feel like women need to know about weaning when it comes to some of these deeper, nuanced topics like their emotions and their physical well being and things like that?
Mm, yes. I mean, like I mentioned before, there really is no perfect timeline. The right timeline is the timeline that's right for the mom,
Yes.
on that individual level. And while I feel like there's a lot of talk about the recommendations, to continue breastfeeding now to age 2, in America, our weaning age average, I believe, is around 3 months, which happens to coincide with when a lot of moms are going back to work,
Mm.
um, which speaks to the lack of support for lactating mothers in the workplace that we're, constantly trying to fight and improve and advocate for moms. Um, but I digress. um, there is a very significant mental emotional piece that we need to consider. In my line of work, I've seen a lot of moms who have tried all of the things. And while I believe that breastfeeding is our birthright, when it doesn't go well, I also believe that there's a valid reason that it didn't. If the body's not making milk or making enough milk, there's usually a reason behind it. And sometimes those reasons are obvious, and sometimes we have to dig. And sometimes we may never actually find out because we don't have the capacity to dig, and it causes more stress. Um, I'm a huge advocate for maternal mental health. I tie that into my nutrition coaching with moms often because the amount of women experiencing perinatal mood and anxiety disorders is significant. 1 in 5. That's a lot of mothers. And breastfeeding challenges increase a mother's risk for experiencing one of those disorders, especially postpartum depression.
Mm.
Um, and so it takes a conversation. It takes self-reflection, I think, on the mother's role to know, have I really reached my capacity in this? What's going to be sustainable for me so I don't run myself into the ground? Sometimes partners are the first ones to be like, hey, I'm really concerned about you. If you have a supportive partner that's really attuned to what's going on. Um, but oftentimes I'm having those conversations with moms if we get to that point, and we have to find a sustainable solution from a place of, again, non-judgment. If a mother is experiencing a mental health concern, whether that's anxiety, depression, or any of the others, I think we have to decide, is breastfeeding worsening this situation? Is there a way that we can change things up to better support your mental health, ensure that baby is still being fed, and maybe hang on to some of these pieces of your breastfeeding journey that you're afraid to let go of? But ultimately, for some, especially second, third time moms who've been this already, they kind of know themselves and they're like, no, I can't go down that road again. It was too hard the first time. And so then we talk about, you know, um, effective and gentle ways to wean off of breastfeeding. We don't want to cut our milk supply, or, we don't want to cut pumping and feeding baby cold turkey, because that can be really detrimental to your health, I would say. It increases your risk for things like engorgement, clogged ducts, mastitis. So there are gentle ways to do that.
Mm.
There are gentle herbs and supplements that we can bring into the piece to kind of support that journey. Um, for some, weaning is a really desirable and urgent matter, I would say, especially if we're thinking about late pregnancy loss, things like stillbirth, the things that we don't really want to talk about as a society, but they're definitely out there and they happen. Um, Again, when you give birth, your body's going to, by biological design, make milk, and that can be a really emotionally triggering experience for those mothers.
Yeah.
So again, weaning is a continuum. There's no perfect way, and we need to just kind of honor that we're all experiencing different journeys, and it's not going to look the same for all of us.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think I would see a lot of my clients in my therapy practice struggle a lot way further down the road than we tend to think about postpartum anxiety and depression. So maybe a year or a year and a half down the road, especially around that weaning time, where, first of all, hormonal changes are profound, but also the physical and relational demands of breastfeeding for a long period of time can really bring a mother to her limits. I think being touched out is so real. And I often see the nuance of weaning especially if you're talking about weaning after maybe 8 months, 9 months, a year and a half, or 2 years. Usually what I'm seeing is that the mother is ready on some level, but that doesn't make it easy. It's not an easy decision. It's very difficult to let go or end or set these new boundaries with your baby to step into a new phase of parenthood. Um, so really just naming the fact that so many women experience massive emotional changes in the 6 to 8 weeks following weaning that I think can be a little bit invisible and a little bit surprising or shocking to all of the sudden be thrust into these hormonal changes, the plummeting of the kind of when you're breastfeeding, you're constantly having this interplay of oxytocin and relaxin and these very kind of calming, nurturing hormones for the mother and the baby. And when you change that, it's kind of wild how the emotional impacts can take a toll. And I do see women stepping into postpartum depression, anxiety much later in their journeys than I think we tend to think, oh, it's either going to happen right after you have your baby or it's not going to happen at all. That's not at all what I see as a therapist, unfortunately. And I think, of course, it just illuminates the fact that we need so much more robust supports for women to achieve their desires and what they know is best for themselves and their baby throughout really the several years following giving birth that our
Yeah.
society just hasn't really been set up for, but we've got to change that.
hmm Yeah. I feel like for the majority of the first year, it's very obviously about the feeding and the nourishment, like at the forefront of our mind. And then after a year, it becomes all of a sudden this more mental shift of like breastfeeding is about emotional bonding and security, even though all of it has been there from the beginning.
Yeah.
But especially when it comes time to weaning, whether it's baby self-weaning abruptly or a mother deciding that she's ready to be done, that bond and that attachment that has been formed over the last X number of months is very apparent. Because now we're dealing with the emotional side of weaning in baby and in mother. And, it's just like you said, like post weaning depression is a very valid thing that I think is also one of those examples of nobody told me
Hmm.
like that this could happen. And so supporting moms through that emotional shift, especially with all of the hormonal changes, it can bring up a lot of like the weepy, teary feelings that we experienced when we first gave birth. And also wondering, like, did I take this experience away from my baby? Is my baby going to be okay? Or if it was more baby led, um, it's more like, wait, like this was my sense of grounding. This was my sense of like an assured way to bond with my baby. Now, how do I bond with my child outside of this experience? And it it's really this invitation to step into the next chapter of that relationship with our child, which has already been starting. We've been laying the foundation for this from the beginning, but it just becomes more apparent, I believe, when breastfeeding has come to its close.
Yeah, beautiful. Oh, there's so much to breastfeeding, and I'm just so grateful for your wisdom and for everything that you've brought into the Birthing Soul app to share with mothers, to prepare them and also provide ongoing support throughout, especially that first year postpartum is just so, so precious. So I'm so grateful to have you here, Kayla. Thank you for sharing your wisdom, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, Britta.